welcome to the Investment Centre. Global Victoria has been working for the last, I'd say, a good 12 months on this particular issue that we have today, and we're very proud to have Meta from China with us today, but also, more importantly, our colleagues from Canberra. We have a number of colleagues here representing the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade, Austrade, and the Department of Industry, Innovation and Science. So welcome and thank you very much. This issue is paramount to this particular industry, and even more so, there's no industry body that represents it. So it makes it even more difficult to hear a coordinated voice. And today's event is about trying to find a coordinated voice in engaging, whether it be the federal government or key bodies such as Meta, to hear from an industry perspective about what's happening. So it's absolutely paramount in putting forward an action plan that we start to understand that we need to work together as a collective. In terms of background for Meta, Nick from AsiaLink will go into greater detail, but she has come down specifically for this, so thank you very much, Meta. Also to our colleagues from Canberra, Sophia, Eugene and Adrian, thank you very much and welcome for coming for this morning. This whole idea, this concept has been a partnership between Global Victoria and AsiaLink Business. And I would like to warmly thank our colleagues at AsiaLink Business for putting this together. It's been a fantastic effort, and it's our first initiative that we have sort of started in the new year in terms of the Victorian eCommerce network. So to Nick, Michelle, Leanne and Daniela, thank you very much for your help, and we look forward to continuing this relationship.
Thank you very much, George, and good morning to everyone. This is a wonderful way to start the week, Monday morning, talking about China and talking about cosmetics regulation. It's rather a heavy topic, but a really important topic. And I think that this morning's session is really going to be incredibly valuable for all concerned. As George mentioned, today's event is a collaboration between Global Victoria and AsiaLink Business. It's a partnership that we value very highly. And we also, this is under the auspices of the Victoria eCommerce Network, which is a fantastic initiative to provide the Victorian business community with insights into the e-commerce operating environment around the world, but with particular focus on Asia, to enable businesses to better navigate those environments. And obviously, if we are going to be looking at the e-commerce environment, and a very big part of that on the current agenda is the cross-border e-commerce environment into China, it's certainly a very large opportunity for a lot of Victorian businesses, but it is also a very complex operating environment. And we only need to look at the current, agenda with what's going on with changes and the continual, expectation of potential change to regulation around cross-border e-commerce. We have new regulations which came into force on the 1st of January this year in relation to Daigou, the Daigou trade, and the Chinese government really putting some specific rules and regulations in place to regulate that trade, and that is going to have implications for many who are engaged with China. And of course the non-tariff barriers related to cosmetic regulation, certification, and the environment when it comes to animal testing. And of course there has been changes to regulatory frameworks under Xi Jinping's changes to some of the structures to government agencies late last year in the formation of the NMPA. So it's a very interesting, challenging operating environment, and of course a cosmetics market that has significant market opportunity. But also it's a market where that opportunity, that competitive environment, and consumer preferences and tastes are changing dramatically. And our keynote for today, Meta Knudsen, is going to be talking about that and more. And we're very, very pleased to have Meta here today. She is not only one of China, but sort of the international leaders when it comes into knowledge and insights into Chinese government regulatory on consumer products, whether that be cosmetics, foods, pharmaceuticals, pet food, vitamins and supplements. Meta is certainly one of the leading experts in this area, and we're very, very pleased and lucky to have her come all the way to beautiful Melbourne to speak with you this morning, to go into quite a bit of detail into the current landscape for cosmetics product regulation and certification. It's an opportunity for you to learn, but also to ask questions, not only of Meta, but also the distinguished panel of federal government representatives that are here today. By way of introduction, I do have one thing in common with Meta, is we're both old-time Shanghai residents, if you will, albeit that I'm now back in Melbourne. Meta has over 15 years experience in China and started off working as a consul for the Danish government based in China, assisting Danish government, Danish enterprises to navigate the Chinese market. After that experience, Meta formed Knudsen and Co CRC, which is a specialist regulatory and certification organisation focusing on those specific domain areas that I mentioned. And Meta has extensive experience working in trade and regulation in Egypt, US, Mexico, and former Baltic countries. Meta is a teacher of international trade at the Copenhagen Business School and also has a PhD in economics and is well published in matters related to financial effects of trade barriers, which is very relevant to today's conversation. So without further ado, I'd like to welcome Meta up to the stage, and Meta is going to firstly provide an overview of the cosmetics market from Meta's very unique point of view, firstly, and then she will go into some detail into the processes for cosmetic product registration in China, and also touch on some interesting pilot projects, including the Leaping Bunny project as well. And then following Meta, we'll have a representative panel from the federal government, which I'll introduce to you in a moment. So, ladies and gentlemen, please warmly welcome Meta Knudsen.
So, first of all, thank you very, very much to come here this Monday morning. I asked Nick the first thing, do we really think people will show up? It's Monday morning and the weather is pretty nice. But here you are, and the engagement by all of you is so important for this particular subject that we're going to talk about today. I want to say thank you to Nick and the Asia Link business. Nick and I have been working together. We share also some of the clients that are here today, and I'm really, really impressed by the work by Asia Link. It is beyond anything I've seen outside the big consulting entities, the global consulting entities. But I also want to say that as ever when I'm speaking at an Australian event, I want to say to you companies that you're really, really spoiled in the sense that you have a government. In this event, it also Global Victoria that are supporting you to overcome some very important trade barriers. And when I say spoiled, I'm actually serious. I come from Denmark, a small country, not a lot of support. We're kind of drowning into the EU. EU is not really in the negotiation at the moment because of Brexit issues, and they're more than busy with solving some of the issues around the Brexit. The US and China's trade relations are not offering an opportunity to discuss trade barriers beyond what is already discussed. So Australia is in a unique position at the moment. And that's actually what I want to base my presentation on today. You're in a unique position to hopefully help us overcome some of the more daunting trade barriers. And for cosmetic industry, the cosmetic regulations in China is actually forming real trade barriers for you. So we are members of the OSCHAM, it's a chamber of commerce, and some years ago, I complained to them and I say, how come that we don't have any cosmetic industries, cosmetic companies as part of the members? Because we could have a lot of interaction with the Australian cosmetic companies. And I soon discovered that very few Australian companies, or I would rather say maybe 1 or 2 Australian companies, are present in China because of the regulatory barriers. And I'm going to talk today about how to overcome these barriers. The Leaping Bunny is actually part of that. So just a little bit about what we do. As Nick say, we help companies within a lot of areas. Cosmetic is only one of them, but cosmetic is still taking up approximately 40% of our revenue. General food, health food filing, supplements, as you know, infant formula, food for special medical purposes. We work in medical devices as well. We have a few drug registration. We do quite a lot of clinical trials, advisory, and we also conduct clinical trials, and we also work quite a lot within government affairs. Mary, our intern from Australia, who's here today, she went to the CRM system and found a few of our company logos. That's very rare we do that. But I want to stress that the way we work in the CRC team is a way where we're working as a team. And that's actually something we're very proud of. And I think that you can ask our clients that when they work with us, they work as an extended team in China. And that's something we're proud of. 98% of our clients come on referrals only. So it's only 2% of our clients that find us on the internet because we're also very bad at PR marketing, actually. So that's something else. So let's talk about the issues here. First China, then a little bit about the market trends in China. So I was asked to provide a little bit insight into the market trends, and I want to emphasize that what we're going to talk about of market trends today it may not be the one that you used to hear about. Key opinion leaders, the distribution channel, the importance of WeChat, and so forth. I'm pretty confident that a lot of other consultants will come and explain that to you. Today we're going to talk about the Chinese cosmetic market as it is from a Chinese perspective. I'm also going to talk a little bit about how we see Australia from a Chinese perspective because it's also quite relevant for you guys. And then explain a little bit about the Leaping Bunny China pilot project. Many years ago, unfortunately, I took one of those pregnant tests. And because I'm a researcher as a background, I called this diagnostic company in the US and I said, excuse me, there's a very tiny line on this device here. What do you think that means? And then this lady, apparently one that has been smoking quite a lot of cigarettes, and she was well beyond past 50 years, she said, honey, there's a few things in line you need to understand. You are not just a little bit pregnant. Either you know you're pregnant or you are not pregnant. And from now on, you grow up to understand that there's certain things in life, when you're there, it's for the rest of your life. And that is what I wanted to say today. Not that I'm pregnant, because that's 21 years ago, but when we talk about China, there's certain industries, supplements, let's take supplements, it's a good example, or infant formula, we can see that it goes across the border. It goes by the daigou traders, it goes cross-border e-commerce, no problem selling these products by these means of distribution. Does that go with cosmetics? And I have to say the answer is no, it does not. For cosmetic industry, either you are there where the consumers are or you are not there at all. And I have a feeling, and that's actually the message today, that either for Australian cosmetic industry, either you're there or you should not go there. Don't invest your money. And the reason is simply that we see in China that if you're not present in the daily life of the Chinese consumer as a cosmetic brand, are not relevant for the consumer, you will miss out. That's also why the regulatory barriers for cosmetic are so relevant to talk about. The second takeaway today, to stay in the same term, is that it takes a village to raise a child. And so when I heard George mentioning that we need collaboration, it's actually very true. But if you can collaborate to be the new A-beauty, as we call it, Australian beauty, we have had Japanese beauty, we have had Korean beauty. If you can take the lead in China as the new Australian beauty trend, you have an immense market opportunity. And I'll illustrate today why I think that. So let's move on to China. China is today the biggest cosmetic market in the world. So it overcame the US this year. It takes up approximately 20% of the global market in cosmetics. And it's growing with, I would say, negative, pessimistic estimate between 7 and 8% a year. The US is now the second largest market, growing at a far lower rate. And Japan, as we all know, Japan, very conservative, grew approximately 2% a year, very difficult to enter. And then we have Australia, and I would say I'm pretty surprised about the growth rate, because that's actually a very positive growth rate for a mature market. But the Chinese market, as in a total perspective, is also, or global perspective, is also interesting, because we can see that across all industries, it's only travel retail that comes on the same level as the Chinese market in growth rates. This was taken by a presentation that I will show you later. It's CIBE, so I think you all know CIBE skincare. And I went to their presentation to get their 5-year plan for China market, and that was one of their slides. What is important to notice about the Chinese market is the growth drivers on the market. We all know that the growing middle class is driving a lot of demand for cosmetic product. But what is very, very interesting within the Chinese market are those small niches where the Australian cosmetic industry is able to actually target very well. One of them is the male beauty market. We also see an increase in the premium products. The premium beauty care is actually driving the whole industry. And the same goes with sunscreen products on the market. The trends on the market, and this is where I think the Australian beauty industry has such a relevance. The trends on the market is within organic and natural. I sneak out my hotel room the other day, not to work, but to go on a little bit on market research. And I went down on Burke Street and Little Chinatown to talk to the Chinese down there, to ask them, so what do you think about Australian skincare? Some of them looked at me like they didn't even know what I was talking about. But I got hold of a few of them, and one of the things they all mentioned is that the Australian skincare is natural. It's natural, it's healthy, and it's safe. The thing about natural has a huge impact on the global cosmetic demand. So it's not only in China, but especially in China, we see a huge demand for natural ingredients. And I want to mention another thing. So I was out to lunch with one of the China's own cosmetic brands, and after that lunch, the CEO, he said, why don't you come over to the office, and I want to show you what we are actually doing research in. And they had 3 top floors just near the center of Shanghai, of a big office building where they do the research. And all floors were about plants, natural ingredients, how they get the water from the Himalayan mountains, how they grow specific products, specific plants in the Himalayan to produce plant extracts for their cosmetics. And I asked him, so what is this? Where does that come from? And he said, well, it's very clear to us that the future belongs to natural ingredients. So one of the things that we see and will see a trend on the Chinese market is an even bigger demand after natural ingredients. Again, a unique selling point from Australia. I have a little note added by my regulatory team. Organic claims are not yet allowed in China. So we don't have organic cosmetic yet. It's something that are under considerations, and I know that they are doing a lot of investigation into that area, but you cannot claim organic still within cosmetics in China. Another trend, and that is a surprise, because as Nick said, I've been in China for many, many years, living and working there. And I have to say, when we initiated the Leaping Bunny China project, personally, I had my doubt about whether the Chinese consumer actually would demand what we call ethical beauty. And also because obviously I'm not Generation Z or X, but it's a little bit of a surprise to see today that there's two demand drivers within cosmetics in China. One is environmental claims, so products that claim to be environmental safe or environmental, like Bulldog is one of our clients. Bulldog, they produce all their packaging material, so the plastic that they use is actually made from sugar canes, so a sustainable material. But we also see increasingly the dialogue about cruelty-free products in China. Another surprise at a conference with the Australian cosmetic industry this autumn, one of the biggest cosmetic industries claimed in their final slide for their strategy is that they would like to be cruelty-free completely. And at the moment, they don't test anything on animals. That was a Chinese conference. So we are talking big changes within what we call ethical beauty in China. We also can see that around search word on the internet. Previously, you couldn't mention cruelty-free, or you could especially not mention cruelty-free at a meeting with the government. So we came around that by mentioning maybe animal testing or alternative test or this kind of thing. But today we can actually talk about cruelty-free quite openly. Although I have to say that we always mention, or we always call our Leaping Bunny China pilot project Leaping Bunny and not Cruelty-Free China. So a lot of things going on. This looks a little bit strange on this one, but I hope you can grasp it. Color makeup, huge. 4 years ago on all the trade fairs in China, there was absolutely no booth on color cosmetics. Today, at the big trade fairs we see here in May, especially in Shanghai, I would say at least 50% of the exhibition is devoted to color cosmetics. Another funny thing that cosmetic companies in Australia need to notice is that in any skincare regime, there is a face mask. And that is because all Chinese women, they include face mask as part of their daily routine. So if you don't, as a cosmetic brand, if you don't have a face mask, maybe it's an idea to start developing it, because the Chinese consumer will actually demand that a brand has a face mask as part of their repertoire. Finally, technologies, and that is it's a funny thing that you will see in department stores today. You can get your face scanned, and you will have a diagnosis of your health of your skin, and then an evaluation. Previously, or just today, or the other day, when I went down to one of the department stores here in Berg Street and asked them for advice, the evaluation is done by a nice lady from Estee Lauder, wherever brand they are, and they give you an evaluation based on what they think is correct for you. But in China, you actually go into one of those face scans, and they will tell you what you need. So it's far more scientific based and less based on a personal evaluation. And another thing is, because the Chinese consumers are not very educated about color makeup, they have asked for a lot of advice, and obviously there's not a lot of advice available from a market that is quite immature in regards to color makeup. So today you can actually get a lot of help online by scanning. You take a picture of your face, and then you can get advice on how to apply or choose color makeup. So a lot of technologies are moving in, and it's quite fun. And I think I heard in the office that one of our employees found her white lipstick color based on one of those apps. So it's actually working. But what is important to notice is that premium cosmetics is driving the growth. It's approximately 40% of the growth within cosmetics is based on an upgrade of the cosmetic. And that is relevant to you because one of the things that we often talk about on the latest consumer is the price points of your products. And very often we actually tell you that you're too cheap. And you like to hear when we say you're too cheap. The thing is just that if you raise the prices in China, you just have to understand you have to raise your prices globally. Because today the connectivity of the consumer is so good that you cannot just raise your prices in one place and not in another one. But premium cosmetics is definitely driving the growth within cosmetics at the moment, also in China. And then men's skincare. I wish I took a photo of a guy I met in the airport the other day. So I went to the cosmetic department in Pudong Airport to ask for a specific product. And I was served by a man. And that man had beautiful skin, but he also was wearing makeup. I wish I took a photo of him because he's, of course, not unique, but you have to understand that the males market in China is amazing because the men are not restricted like I think in Australia where the male type is very male and the female very female. In China, it's more fluid, and the men are more open. And the good thing about men is that they're open in a curious, open way. So they don't have fixed ideas. And those of you who tailor the men's industry, amazing opportunities, amazing. The competition is almost zero. We may have between 5 to 7 brands at the moment, and I know that I saw that even Chanel in the airport. You can notice that they're trying to cater to men now. So an amazing industry for those of you who have male products as well. But back to the real thing, the reason why I'm here. So, unfortunately, Australia cosmetics are not in China. And that's a problem. And why is that? Because, as you can see on the left-hand side, the compliance requirements by the Chinese government has definitely done their job. In the sense that now we see that among the top 10 companies in China, most of them are now made up by Chinese brands. They're huge. And the reality is, we know that from Coty. So Coty, you can see over here, one of our clients, they're not even mentioned on that list to the left side because they're not there. So if you're not in China, if you're not on the market, you're not really selling to the Chinese consumers. You have to be there. We talked to Coty in London during the autumn, and Coty have now decided that they want to set up their global innovation and research center in Shanghai. Why? Because they're not on the list to the right. China is the world's biggest cosmetic market, and China is going to lead the innovation within cosmetics and skincare for the future. So there's no doubt that if you want to sell to China, you want to be there. You need to be there. It's a requirement. So let's talk a little bit about Australia. As I said, natural products, unique selling points. This is some of the key unique selling points that my own team found on social media in China. Aspirational, animal welfare, affinity brands, natural, key opinion leader, and high quality. I could continue to mention a lot of other key unique selling points. They also mentioned this case study, but in essence, what Australian Cosmetics has is, and that's a list that we came up with. You're very strong within natural, you're very strong within organic products. You have a premium quality. So when we search online for Australian brands within cosmetics, it's about quality and it's about health and it's about safety. Then it's about sunscreen products. So what you don't think about is that because of Australia's location on the globe, you have a lot of innovation of premium products within sunscreen SPF products. And maybe more importantly, the Australian brand, the Made in Australia, the brand in itself is an extremely strong brand. That's also something we will talk about later on in the Leaping Bunny project. But you have these unique selling points and you need to use them in China because it's going to be the future there, even if you're not there. So these unique selling points, you will actually see other brands take these unique selling points as their own. And I'll show you how they do this. This is CIBE. So at their strategy presentation, 5-year strategy, they said, we are going to be a global winner with our heritage, right? And then they said, support for working women, empowering women, protecting skin from UV rays, and so forth. Honestly, it's not their heritage. It's not their heritage. It's your heritage. But they know that this is what the Chinese consumer would like to have. So they are adapting. They are taking your unique selling points and make them theirs. Let's then talk about how you can come to China, overcome the regulatory compliance barriers, because we have to admit that it is a very effective barrier for you to enter the Chinese market. And now I'm sorry, it might be boring. It's just like when you are at the dentist, right? At a certain point they say, okay, now it hurts a little bit. That's what we're going through now. But I also want to say I've handed out this little booklet. I don't know whether you see it. So it's a little booklet that is in this red folder. And I'm sorry I didn't have enough. I didn't expect to see so many of you. You can download it on our website, and if you write us an email, I'll make sure that you also get a copy. That booklet is an old-fashioned series that is developed for me. The booklet is skincare for dummies. So regulatory compliance for dummies, made for me. It was made 5 years ago, the first version for me before a seminar, so I understood the more technical concept of regulatory compliance for skincare in China. We continuously updated. This last print was made, I think, this November, and it's outdated. So we don't print 1,000 copies of compliance booklets in China anymore. We only print maybe 200. This one is outdated. We have new regulations within filing that we will explain, but all the regulations that are governing cosmetics in China are mentioned there. Another thing, there's no such things as stupid questions in regards to regulatory compliance in China because it does not always make sense. So just bring the questions in, even though you sometimes think they're a little bit ridiculous, it could make very good sense. So we have a few stakeholders I wish to mention. So Nick mentioned NMPA. NMPA was the former CFDA. So today, when we talk about the Food and Drug Administration, today they're called NMPA, and they're the one that are in charge of your cosmetic filings and registrations. Then you have CACC, again, a new entity. In the old days, this was AQSIQ and CIQ, but we have a new entity today that are going to be in charge of both the customs and the inspection. As a matter of fact, when you go out there and you think you are going to meet one office only, it's not entirely true because it's still two offices, but they expect to merge at a certain point into inspection and customs. And then another stakeholder that is important for you is the testing labs. So we work obviously very closely with the testing labs in China. And we can also see, good news for you, that the testing labs get less and less work because less companies are testing on animals. And within certain drug registration, animal testing is no longer required. So that's another very important stakeholder for you. And then, of course, as everyone, I guess, that comes here with a presentation talk about trademark registration, please do your trademark registrations because that's a very, very big trade barrier. Still, after so many years in China, always preaching about your trademark registration, please register your trademark, even though you're not even consider going to China. But I'll get back to that. A new change that you need to be very aware of when you register or you file your products in China is the responsible agent. It's something that very few have had a focus on. And now Nick mentioned the cross-border e-commerce regulation and also the e-commerce regulations in regards to the daigou traders and how you register your platforms in China. Very, very few have mentioned the fact that the government has actually put far more emphasis now on the responsible agent. So the responsible agent is the one that owns your product registration in China. So when you register a product in China, there must be a legal entity that owns your registration there. And we always advise you, don't give it to a distributor. Don't give the rights to a distributor because you lose control of your product. And one way of come around that is to establish your own entity. The good thing is it's relatively easy today to establish your own entity, so it's actually a solution. Another solution we have offered our clients previously was that we could act as your responsible agent, and then when you had a distributor ready to take over, we could transfer the rights to your distributor. That is no longer possible. So you really have to be careful in regards to who you choose as your responsible agent, because you can no longer transfer your product registration from one responsible agent to another. Number one. Number two is there are a lot of additional requirements in regards to your responsible agent. So one of the things is that you need to have a warehouse. You need to have a cosmetic filing in your business scope. You need to have an import and export license. But maybe the most important part is that you need actually to report to the authorities about your sales and distribution in China. And I don't think anyone is aware of that, but it's a pretty severe requirement in the sense that every time you ship a container of products into China, you have to know exactly where they're distributed. And the reason is that the government wants to be absolutely sure that if there is a safety issue with your products, they're able to do a product recall. But that work is something your responsible agent in China must be aware of, because it's going to be inspected. And you are supposed to have order in your books. So it's an area where I would like you to put a little bit of a focus on, because it's the first question we will ask you if you want to import or register your product in China. It's the first question we will ask you, that is, who is your responsible agent? And if you don't have one, we will talk to you about how you can overcome that barrier. We have some solution at hand, but it's something you really need to be aware of. And another advice on our part is keep control. Keep these registrations within your own company. Don't give it out to anyone. Unfortunately, we have what we call 6 unhappy marriages going on in our office, where it's lawsuits to get the registrations back. And that's just not good. So very quickly, it's actually, we have three processes in China. Three filing, registration, and then the leaping bunny process for registration of products, cosmetic products in China. As you know, the Chinese government, they changed the regulations for filing of cosmetics products, non-special use cosmetic products last year. And it's a much swifter process. We were fortunate enough to be invited to be part of the first pilot that took place in Pudong, and we tried it out, and I must say that it's much swifter process. So a product registration can be done within, I would say, 4 to 5 months, depending on the documentation. Most often, to be honest, the delays in a product registration is with you, it's not with us, because there is a lot of documentation that you need to collect in order to be, so that we can actually apply for the registration. But it takes approximately 4 to 6 months. Special use cosmetics is far more complicated. And you can see just examples of how we differentiate special use cosmetics and non-special use cosmetics. You have to keep that in mind when you do product registrations in China, because special use cosmetics is far more complicated and far more costly. I also want to say that, for example, products that includes sunscreen is not necessarily a sunscreen product. It can go into non-special use cosmetics, but the claims are very important. For the domestic filing, there is an area that I would like you to be a little bit pay attention to. And that is, with the new filing option, it's much faster. But the problem is that when you do a product filing in China, you will get an approval number after maybe only 2 to 3 months. But the problem is, it's not necessarily that your product will be approved eventually. So our recommendation to all cosmetic companies is wait until you have actually been reviewed by the NMPA, because you may be rejected. And I'll later explain you how much the percentage of rejection was in 2018. Here, a little bit about the process. So every time we start work with a cosmetic product, we start with a screening. And no matter who you work with in China, whether it's your own team or it's an agent or someone like us, then we will start out by screening the products whether all the ingredients are approved in China. And it's simply to save money and time. So most agents like us, we will do it free of charge, because if you have an ingredient in all your products that are not allowed in China, we will waste money to start an ingredients registration, a product registration. It's a problem. It's a trade barrier. A lot of the modern ingredients in cosmetic are not approved in China. That trade barrier is not that relevant for Australian cosmetics, because you're very natural. You use natural ingredients. So I would say it's mostly a trade barrier for companies that comes out of the US, because they have a lot of innovation in new chemical ingredients and they are not approved in China. But in your case, it's not so often we see it. But just before Christmas, we had a little bit of a shock because all of a sudden in NMPA they announced that by this date, 4 ingredients are banned in all ingredients in China, these ingredients that are there. And unfortunately, several of our clients, they have one or several of these ingredients in their products, and that with immediate effect. And it seems like no government and no one was actually warned about this. And it means that all the work and the money that was invested in this registration was lost. And we have to do everything, redo everything again. So ingredient screening, first step. And then we have the whole process. You can read about the process in the booklet. I don't want to go into details with that, but I want to stress this one, a very, very important part. So when you go through the filing of your cosmetic product, it might go very smooth and very fast, and just after 3 months, all of a sudden, we call you and we say, here is your registration number, you're good to go. But you're actually not entirely sure whether you're good to go, because after the technical review, you still may be rejected. And on a meeting we were invited with the NMPA, they told us that they expect the future rejection rate to be approximately 50%, 0%. So don't rest assured, because what I'm worried about in this new regulation is that you pack a container of expensive cosmetic products, you ship it to China, and when they arrive to China, you risk that half of them are not approved after all. And we all know how it is to have a container stuck there. You don't want that. So that's a very important part. Then claims is an area where we work a lot, and this is just an example of claims. It's actually an art form, so we have a person in the office who can help you with claims. Claims is to navigate around forbidden words, and we get a lot of inspiration from a company like L'Oreal. I think they have 6 people just working on creative claims in China. You cannot write whitening, but you can write brightening. And the characters are just twisted here and there, and they're super smart. So we help you with your claims so that you're still allowed to explain about your product, but you stay compliant with the Chinese regulations. Claims is a big area. And then obviously trademark. Our own company does not accept any cases, no clients, unless you're trademark registered. And it is simply because we don't want to waste your time and money. Trademark registration or lack thereof are still one of the biggest trade barriers in China. And it's extremely important to register your trademark. Even though that you are in Australia, you don't have maybe any ambitions to sell to China, register your trademarks. And we actually offer it as a service, non-profit, just to get it done. We are a trademark agent, and we register these trademarks for approximately 400 Australian dollar for 10 subcategories. So call us if you have some trademarks you wish to register, because it's just ridiculous waste of time and money. And we have quite a lot of cases, especially within cosmetic, where your brand has been taken by a Chinese squatter, unfortunately. And then quickly about the Leaping Bunny pilot project. How long time? The biggest, in our view, the biggest trade barrier for Australian cosmetics is actually animal test. It's very effective because you're not there. And it's a trade barrier that we have wanted to work to remove for many, many years. It's of course super annoying that you have fantastic brands from Australia, and we cannot get them into the market because of this requirement, mandatory animal test for all foreign cosmetics. We decided some years ago to start the work to dismantle that trade barrier, and I'm not sure I can say that we are successful, but one of the objectives with the Leaping Bunny project was to initiate a discussion, and a discussion on all levels. So one thing was to bring the companies across the barrier into China, and we were successful with that. Another objective was to initiate a discussion on a high level with the government on animal testing, and I think I can say that we're also proceeding quite well with that. We still need a lot of support in this project. We still need dialogue, we need discussions, we need discussions that are not based on rumors, on, I would say, what we call in our office, because I'm a crazy cat lady, so crazy cat lady's blog, about how China's regulatory environment is, but really a sound, maybe even academic-based dialogue on the need of animal tests in China. And in that regard, I think the Leaping Bunny China pilot project has been quite successful so far. And I want to explain you more about this pilot. Meanwhile, this is just from our little team in Shanghai. They wanted to congratulate you with some of your progress within your own ban on animal tests. As far as we know, last Friday, there was certain ingredient, or the Australian government had some advancement within this area. And we hope that, of course, Australia will also move on with a ban on animal tests. So just to look for the whole market, there's been a ban on animal tests for many years in Europe since 2013. We also have a ban in place in India since 2014, in Canada, in California, and in Brazil. China have not had any animal, ban on animal tests, but we have how do you say that? Since 2014, it is possible for domestic produced cosmetics not to test on animals. So it's not, we cannot say we're even close to a ban, but we are definitely on the route or in a development where we are changing animal tests to in vitro testing or alternative testing in China. And it is an open and declared objective from the authorities to move rapidly towards exchanging animal tests with in vitro testing or alternatives to animal tests. The Chinese government claimed that it's because of safety issues that there is a mandatory animal test in place. I'm not sure whether that is correct. You can say that it's definitely working as a trade barrier for Australian cosmetics, but it's still in place in China. We still have a mandatory animal test for all imported cosmetic products. So we started the project back in 2016, just a crazy side project, I would say, that developed into a big project. So just for fun, almost we started it actually in the beginning of 2016. We did a research on this area because a lot of our clients are now requiring us to do something. And we took 3 companies through the process. So we took 3 cosmetic brands from the beginning to the end to see whether there was any risk. Obviously, I cannot mention these brands because they're not yet certified by Cruelty Free International, but we wanted to test the route. We wanted to test the system, how it's working, also how does it work when you import in bulk into China and you do the final filling within China. So we started that in 2016, and at the same time we also called up or met up with 60 local CFDA laboratories to talk to them about animal testing, especially as part of post-market test. And after that, one thing is that you know that you have a route to the market. So I could come to Australia and I could say, so now we have a route to the market. Do you want to come to China? And almost all companies, they said to us, it doesn't really create any values that we don't perform any animal test. We need someone who can certify, who can promise that we are cruelty-free. Because if we enter China today, we will lose all our global customers. We're done. So we reached out to Cruelty Free International in UK, and we asked them if they kindly could consider a partnership with us on this route to the market. And we chose Cruelty Free International that has the Leaping Bunny because they enjoy the highest esteem within international the cosmetic community. We did quite a lot of research, and some of the cruelty-free certification are not welcome in China because of some of their methods that they're using. So we also had to choose a cruelty-free organization that actually understood how to be diplomatic, because we knew that this Leaping Bunny China pilot project can only come into place by diplomacy. We need dialogue with the government on these issues. And therefore we chose Cruelty Free International, and Michelle, the CEO, has been in China many times since then. And then we met with the municipal CFDA in April 2018, and I want to say thanks to Australia again, because we could only meet with the municipal CFDA, that's actually on the ministerial level, if we brought in someone who was close to be on the ministerial level. And the first thing that I did was, of course, to call Austrade. And Brent, he said, I'm really sorry, we have an important minister, we cannot participate in that meeting, but why don't you call Auschem? So we called Auschem, we're a member of the Chamber of Commerce in Shanghai. And of course, the CEO came, and in addition to that, Swiss and a couple of other companies, they joined for a meeting with the Shanghai Municipal CFDA to confirm the process. We wanted to be absolutely sure that the process that we recommended the companies was actually viable. And especially an issue about post-market test that has posed a lot of dispute in the media. Is there animal test as part of post-market test? We wanted to confirm with the Shanghai CFDA that that's not the case. And that happened in April 2018. And then a couple of months later, we were happy to sign with a local partner in China, the Oriental Beauty Valley in the Fengsheng district. And they're our Chinese partner that conduct the filling. It's approximately 100 manufacturers in that district. It's a zone of cosmetic innovation and development. And the Cosmax, one of the biggest OEM producers in the world, is located in that area. So we wanted to make absolutely sure that we could control the whole project. And this November, we then launched the first 4 companies in the Leaping Bunny project. We have approximately 82 companies now on a waiting list to be part of the Leaping Bunny project. It's complicated to be part of it because first you have to be certified by Cruelty Free International, and as I said, they're the most strict in the world, so it's quite a process. We expect to launch the next pilot project in May, and we really hope that we will welcome at least 1 or 2 Australian brands in the next pilot program. Just briefly, we are not very good at marketing and PR. I just want to stress that. We're actually very, very bad at it. And so when Cruelty Free went out in the media to announce this project, everybody said, wow, you have changed the regulations. We have not changed the regulations. We have used an existing regulatory framework for the Leaping Bunny China pilot project. I wish we could change the regulation, but we need the government's help to change regulations. What the Leaping Bunny project is using is actually the route to market for domestic produced non-special use cosmetics. That's what it's about. And the solutions that are available for the companies is either to produce 100% in China, use domestic ingredient providers and produce everything from scratch in China. You can also ship the ingredients to China, mix it on the Chinese market, and then finally, of course, you can ship the solutions, the finished solutions, into the Chinese market and only perform the final manufacturing on the Chinese market. And you adhere to the regulations for domestic cosmetics. The number one solution is actually the one that most companies are using. And it's also a matter of quality control to make sure that you can actually control everything. In addition to that, we also have a QC team that is participating in the production in China so that everything is controlled. This is the timeline. It's much swifter as compared to any other market entry for cosmetics because we are now domestic cosmetics. I promise you, you don't even need to take photos. I promise I'll share this presentation with all of you, so you will get it afterwards. Maybe some of the experiences we have had or some of the questions we have had in regards to the Leaping Bunny advantages and challenges is, The biggest challenge by far is if you're not used to that final process of filling and packaging outside of your domestic market, that's of course a barrier. That's a problem. That said, I'm forever impressed by the local partners in China. The fillers that take the finished solution and put it into your bottles or jars or tubes, whatever you use, and do the packaging. Super professional, super fast. Some of the biggest companies that are part of the pilot at the moment, they will produce approximately 10,000 samples or products of each SKU, and it's done in one day for approximately 5 to 10 different SKUs. So they're quite professional, and they also tells us when they visit from abroad, they visit these facilities, that the quality and the safety is quite good. We like to work with your local manufacturers, so the local manufacturers are key for this to actually succeed. The local manufacturers is those that we work mostly with, and it's not only within cosmetics, it's also infant formula, supplements, and so forth. Because the local manufacturers are the one that are doing the formulation, they're doing the production, they're actually the production partner. The only thing that are conducted in China is the packaging. But positive surprise, much swifter process, much quicker, less documentation, and cost effective. So you will save all the test costs, and it's actually quite expensive to perform animal tests. It's approximately 10 to 12% times more expensive to conduct an animal test as compared to the safety assessment report. So much more, much cheaper and much quicker. That has been the experiences so far. No, actually, I think I want to touch on one thing, because a question that we get a lot, two questions. What about made in Australia? What about our brand? The most important part of who we are, that is made in Australia. Even in the airport, when you get out of the airport, there's a kangaroo and the Made in Australia brand, and you have something to be extremely proud of. Maybe more than anyone else. So what do you do about your Made in Australia brand? I think the best answer to that question is you don't need to write Made in China on a product that are packaged in China. The only thing you need to mention that is required or mandatory you need to mention is the facility where you do the final packaging in China. On the product, we can explain a lot about your solutions, about your ingredients, that it's 100% ingredients from Australia. We can tell the whole story. Some of the companies that have visited us in regards to the Leaping Bunny pilot, we have actually went on market research tours to visit L'Oreal and the Maybelline and some of the other brands that are producing in China to see what they say. They don't say anything because everybody know these brands, right? So everybody know that L'Oreal is from France, and for the other big brands, they know it's an American brand and it's a French brand and so forth. So they don't claim much. But if you wish to tell your story about Australia, you're welcome to do so. It's actually allowed. So we can tell a lot about your ingredients on the packaging. It's one of the most important questions, I guess, in that regard. Then a little bit about our partners and what we do. The Oriental Beauty Valley, and especially the Foshan District, the Foshan District government has been extremely supportive, and it has not been a smooth process to launch a cruelty-free project in China is not a smooth project for anyone. I would say that without the help from the Oriental Beauty Valley, the Foshan District, and the Fengpu Industrial Park, we would not have been where we are today. And I visited the mayor's office just before Chinese New Year. So this is part of what we do before Chinese New Year, to go and say Happy New Year to our partners. And the mayor asked us, is there anything we can do for you? And I was just thinking, they have done so much for us. They have risked so much to bring that to the agenda in China. The good thing is now, as you saw the graph about how the Chinese companies are now dominating the Chinese industry. So the next thing for the Chinese cosmetic industry is to go global. So within the last year, everything has changed. And that's also why this is the time where we actually is able to engage with the government about the negotiation on this project. Because of course the Chinese cosmetic industry wants to claim that they're cruelty-free. And they can only do that if we start this dialogue with the government about a ban on mandatory animal tests. So thank you to the Chinese government, because for sure we wouldn't have been here if it wasn't because of their support. And then our work on this, we help you with everything, I would say. We do the whole thing. We have done that, and I want to stress that, and I know that the board will be very unhappy when I say that, but the Leaping Bunny pilot project, we have actually worked free of charge for 3 years on this project. So until now, we have not charged anything, and maybe it's because I've worked in the government for too many years. I'm used to just provide services for free, but it was such a big trade barrier that we have to find a way to overcome this. This is the first step, and it's definitely, I'm sure we're going to earn money on it in the future, especially now when we see that the Chinese government is also, Chinese companies are also in demand for this service. So we're going to set up, hopefully, and this is of course confidential, but the first cruelty-free China office in the next year will be set up within our office, and we will serve clients from Asia out of Shanghai from our office, which we're very proud of. And cruelty-free based in UK, I think those of you who are applying for the pilot at the moment, and I must say there are quite a lot of Australian companies that are interested in participating in the Leaping Bunny pilot. You already know cruelty-free, they're very strict, and they're not always so responsive in regards to answering your emails. And I can only tell you it's simply because the whole world right now wants to be a member of cruelty-free. So the big cosmetic, global cosmetic brands at the moment are applying for a lot of their brands to be cruelty-free. Cody's CoverGirl was one of the first big global brands that became cruelty-free this year. And I know that both Estee Lauder and Coty and the other big cosmetic groups are right now certifying their brands to be cruelty-free. And maybe because of China's importance in this regard. So post-market test has been a big issue. It's not such a big issue anymore. It's still something we need some help to negotiate with the government. Post-market test is relevant because there is in the laws, in the regulatory framework for post-market testing, there's still the opportunity that these tests can be conducted on animals. That's it. There are no such thing in China that is different from the regulatory framework in the US. But we rarely hear that mentioned in the media. As a matter of fact, almost in all legislations around the globe, post-market test or animal test as part of post-market test may take place because of safety issues. It is about consumer safety, and obviously the Chinese government, when we bring this to the table, they also look at us and say, come on, we still need to have that option that we can test on animals if there is a safety issue with the cosmetics. And we actually support that. It's still a stumbling block to some extent, and it's some of the dialogue that we have at the moment with the authorities is whether we can at least get some kind of announcement from the government that animal test as part of post-market test does not take place on a routine basis. They already confirmed that during the CIBE, and I would say it's what we call a theoretical barrier, but it's still a barrier. And finally, if you have any questions, if there is anything we can help you with, please do not hesitate to reach out. A lot of you I know already, and I'm just happy to be back. You can always write an email, WeChat me. We try to answer as soon as possible, and whenever you're in Shanghai, please come by. So we are moving out to the Hongqiao area now, just in the center of the new hub, and it would be great if you come by. We also have part of our services is that I personally hate consultants. I have to be honest with you. I don't like it because every time you grab the phone and all of a sudden you have an invoice, right? It's the worst part. We all know that, right? Our company has that philosophy that, first of all, if you're not successful, we're not successful. And two, you never ever get an invoice unless it's agreed upon. And in this particular area, you can count on maybe 4 or 5 hours of negotiations and talks and dialogues and ingredient screenings and so forth before we even start anything. So just so you know, reach out, let's have a talk, let's explain about some of the work that we are doing, let's make an ingredient screening, and then let's see whether there is a space for you in China. Personally, I hope Australian cosmetic industry would come to China. I also hope that the Australian government would like to help us overcome some of the barriers that we have ahead of us on the market. And at least we're here to help you. So thank you for coming today. And if you have any question, please feel free.
Thank you very much, Meta. You'll all have a chance to ask Meta questions during this morning. So that's not the last we're going to hear from you. I've actually got at least 10 questions. But if none of you are going to ask questions to Meta, there's at least 10 that I can get into as part of the Q&A session, which will happen shortly. But before we do that, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to have a panel of representatives from the federal government, from Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade, and also the Department of Industry, Innovation and Science. So I'd like to introduce each of the panellists, and then they will each give a few minutes of remarks in relation to their specific engagement with cosmetic regulation in relation to their particular areas of expertise. So I'd first like to invite Sophia Vincent to come up, and Sophia, you're over here. Sophia is the Director of the Non-Tariff Barrier Strategy Section at the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade in Canberra. Sophia is an experienced trade negotiator and trade policy advisor. She's worked on 7 of Australia's free trade agreements, including the TPP, the Hong Kong FTA, and is currently a lead negotiator in the EU-Australia FTA. Prior to her role with DFAT on trade negotiation, she was the Australian delegate to the OECD Committee on Innovation, Innovation, Industry and Entrepreneurship, and has had several policy roles at the Department of Innovation, Industry, Innovation and Science. So welcome, Sophia. Next, I'd like to welcome Eugene Olim, who is the Deputy Director of the China Trade and Economic Team in the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade. Eugene advises on bilateral trade and investment issues, including areas such as aviation, regional infrastructure, e-commerce, and cybersecurity. Eugene has worked closely with Australian peak advisory groups to coordinate Australia's responses to draft Chinese regulations in relation to cross-border data transfers, overseas investment, e-commerce, and cryptography. Eugene was posted to Beijing in 2016 and Tokyo in 2005, where he assisted Australian firms to manage regulatory challenges in China. So welcome, Eugene. And finally, Adrian White, who is Manager Health Technologies with the Australian Government Department of Industry, Innovation and Science. He previously participated in negotiations in the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade on problems as diverse as biological weapons, global patent rules and access to HIV/AIDS medicines in developing countries, standard setting in OECD and APEC, as well as reforming the Passport Act to introduce biometrics. Over the last decade, he has worked in the Australian Government's Health Department, advising on some of the impact to trade agreements on the Pharmaceutical Benefits Scheme, as well as an array of global biotech policy developments, including the Global Influenza Preparedness Framework. Impressive panel we have here today. So I'd like to perhaps, in order of coming up to the table, I'd like to, Sophia, if you wouldn't mind starting off with a few comments first.
And I'll just check this is on. Can everyone hear? Great. Well, thank you. Thanks, Nick, for the introduction. It's a pleasure to be here today. As mentioned, I'll be talking about the federal government's new non-tariff barrier strategy. I'll start with a little bit of information about the strategy and the action plan, and then briefly how China's mandatory animal testing requirements fit within this new whole of government approach. So first, a little bit of context and I guess definitions. A non-tariff barrier is basically exactly what it sounds like, everything besides a tariff. So this strategy has come about in recognition of the fact that the government has a very active free trade agreement agenda, which is very good at addressing traditional trade barriers such as tariffs. And they do have some role in NTBs, but really there's a lot more that can be done here. And these non-tariff barriers, all the other regulatory issues that affect business, is really where a lot of the costs are, and where some of the most significant barriers are in trading and exporting without trading markets. So in recognising that, on the 7th of December, the Minister for Trade, the Assistant Minister for Trade, the Minister for Industry, and the Minister for Agriculture announced a new non-tariff barrier action plan. And our goal is to have a business and government partnership that can help to remove these non-tariff barriers to trade around the world. So there's three main pillars in this new action plan that I'll just briefly go through. First is access. We're really aiming to build frontline expertise, both with businesses and with governments, about how to address non-tariff barriers. And we'll be rolling out a series of new training programs, initiatives to help skill up government officials on the front line, but also businesses on how to engage with government and how to engage with other countries. And second, of access, we're making it easier to report your trade barriers. We've established a new gateway on the DFAT website for you to report all trade issues that affect the federal government. That affect businesses, so you can report that to the whole of the federal government. The second pillar is collaboration. So we're introducing some new systems and we're investing in new IT systems to help manage, coordinate and track trade barriers as they're reported to business. And that'll be across the government. It's a partnership with all agencies and Austrade to help simplify and streamline how we manage those NTBs and hopefully save time for businesses so that you won't have to approach multiple agencies. There'll be a record there where you're open to sharing that information across government. And secondly, on collaboration, we're hoping to support industry to help analyse and develop plans and solutions to address NTBs through a collaborative approach. And finally, we're looking to agree on collective action, really looking at joint partnerships and working with industry when we receive information about an NTB. And the third pillar is transparency. We'll be looking to set new standards and performance requirements for governments and being clear on expectations about what you can expect from government, looking at things like, maximum of 2 days to receive a response and other kind of performance requirements. And we'll also be looking to regularly report on progress about non-tariff barriers and share as much information as we can about issues that affect you. So in saying that, that's the action plan. It's a really early stage of the project at the moment. The government's been looking at NTBs, for a very long time now. We've identified over 100 different non-tariff barriers that are getting looked at across the federal government at the moment, and many of those with a very long history. But as part of this action plan, this new approach, China's mandatory animal testing requirements is one issue that we will be taking a much closer focus on, and we'll be piloting some of these new systems and initiatives and approaches on this particular issue. And we hope that while we have been looking at this issue for many years, that a renewed focus looking at how we can have a more coordinated approach across government and explore all the different avenues that might be available to us in a closer partnership with industry will help to make sure that we're really putting the best foot forward in trying to address this issue. So I'll probably leave it there. We only have 3 minutes. I'll also just say I've got some little postcards here about the strategy plan and where you can report your NTBs. I'll leave them on this desk for the end of the show, and you're happy to take one if you'd like to have a look at the website and hear a bit more about it. So that's it from me for now.
Thank you very much, Sophia. You will have a chance to ask Sophia, Eugene and Adrian questions at the end of their introductions as well. So I'd like to ask Eugene Olim, Deputy Director, China Economic and Trade Section of DFAT, to make a few remarks.
Thanks very much, Nick. So I'm going to speak a little bit about the background of the as Meti described, this trade barrier that we're facing in China, where animal testing is mandatory for products which are coming into the country, but not so much for products which are manufactured in China. Now, I was in China, in Beijing in 2016, and I had quite a few meetings where this issue was raised. A lot of Australian companies are concerned about that, and this is something which we're increasingly focused on, as Sophia has just pointed out. There's quite a lot of international support for moving these regulations in China. We've had discussions with the European delegation in particular, but also UK counterparts and other smaller missions in Beijing, like the Israelis and others. By and large, they're all one-minded with us, and they would like to see a change in China on this. And our assessment is very much in line with Meta's in that now is the time to press the Chinese on this, because just as their own firms need to or want to go global and so need to move this regulation, it's a perfect time for us to go in there as well. We've actually been raising this issue with the Chinese for over 10 years now in Geneva. The Chinese have said to us 2 things, basically. That is that their regime is not discriminatory, and that they're happy to talk about how they can cooperate with foreign firms on developing alternatives to animal testing. Now, the first that first comment that we get from Chinese authorities makes us roll our eyes a bit, but that's what they keep saying to us. The second one, we think, gives us a pointer on how we need to move forward. We did meet with UK counterparts in November in in Shanghai, and we got some very frank comments from some Chinese officials who pointed out to us that they really did see the existing regime as being a way to protect Chinese companies. So there is an entrenched view there that we're going to have to overcome. That said, we think that now's the time to take them on, and the fact that China is having some pretty tough negotiations with the US probably adds a little bit of momentum to what we're doing. That said, we have to be realistic. We've got quite a challenge ahead of us. In terms of where we've had some thoughts about some of the elements of how we can move forward, and we think that industry needs to consider a few things along with the federal government as well. The fact that there are at least 3 industry peak organisations who cover or are concerned by this issue suggests to us that those 3 need to speak to each other. Those 3 need to be part of the messaging to the federal government on the way forward. Those organisations have in the past 6 to 9 months done a great job at raising the profile of this issue. I think that we can say quite confidently now that this issue is definitely on our radar, and so great job. But what we need now is to know with some confidence how we are going to define a cooperative approach to deal with the Chinese, where we don't leave anyone in Australian industry behind, so that the solution that we put up is not going to be criticised from within Australia. And we are certainly, in the federal government, standing by ready to work with you to nail all that down. In terms of what the federal government is going to do, we think now is the time to speak with stakeholders such as yourselves. We need to do this in all states and territories in Australia, and in particular we need to work closely with firms that have operations in China or are exporting to China. You probably know that in our free trade agreement discussions, there is a technical barriers to trade working group meeting which occurs roughly, well, it's supposed to occur every year, and we hope it will convene this year. And this is a good opportunity for the government to speak with the Chinese government. And when this working group convenes next, which we expect will probably be in the second half of this year, we certainly intend to make animal testing an important part of the agenda. And so as we move towards that, of course, we want industry to tell us what are the key messages we need to convey there. We continue to seek meetings with the Chinese in Beijing, in Shanghai, in Guangzhou, and we last met with them in November, where the Assistant Secretary from my division in the North Asia division in DFAT met with her Deputy Director General level counterpart in Beijing and raised animal testing. We got the usual response that we got from them, but they knew we were coming, and we signalled that we are going to continue to come and speak to them. We're liaising with counterparts in Geneva and Brussels at the same time, and we'll continue to do that. We sense that we've probably said all we can say in those fora, but we'll continue to talk in the margins as a way to generate awareness. But our assessment now is that we need to speak directly with Chinese officials, and we need the weight of industry behind us, and we need everyone to be, as much as possible, to be agreed on what those key messages are going to be. The recent reorganisation of the Chinese bureaucracy has created a lot of challenges for us. There have also been broader challenges in the relationship, and just generally there are global challenges that China is dealing with. I think you probably know what all of that involves, but what it means is that it's very difficult for us to get calls quickly with Chinese officials. But we continue to do so, and as the profile of this particular trading barrier rises, it becomes more and more important for ministers, and we think that over, going forward, this is going to be an issue that will be raised at higher and higher levels. I just want to say in closing quickly that there is one more fora where this issue might be advanced and industry might want to consider participating in, and that is in the APEC Chemical Dialogue. Okay, the APEC Chemical Dialogue was actually inaugurated in China, in Shenzhen, about 10 years ago, and the purpose of that dialogue was so that trade and officials could get together and discuss trade facilitation and trade barriers which affected chemicals, also particularly regulatory policies and practices. Okay, the purpose of that particular dialogue is to facilitate trade and to understand and overcome regulatory barriers. So the Chinese participate in that dialogue, so it may be a good match here, another area where we can raise awareness with Chinese officials, and that really, from our perspective, is one of the bigger challenges that we face at the moment. So I'll just leave it there. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Eugene. I'd now like to ask Adrian White, Manager, Health Technologies, Department of Industry, Innovation and Science, to make a few remarks.
Thanks, Nick, and for organising this this forum, and thanks to Meta for just the excellent summary for all of us to put together all the different pieces on a very few amounts of slides. Now my role is from the Department of Industry, Innovation and Science. Predominantly, I would see the problems, which we see here, are more at the industry end rather than the science end of this of the technology spectrum. Sophia and as Eugene have set out in the big picture some of the key activities and points which the Australian government is delivering. Within the industry department, we see a key part of our role is to get out there and really understand the nuts and bolts of the sector and the businesses, so that we can work across government in all the different ways to look for solutions which might be there, and we do that in all sorts of different ways. As Eugene said, there's at least 3 peak bodies who cross over in this sector, and so they're the sorts of groups who we do need to work with. There's no point in the government coming up with a solution if it's not going to actually address the practical problems now, and more importantly, the practical problems in 5 years' time as well, when we're going to deploy that amount of the amount of resources which are necessary and commonly can lead to ambassador or a visiting minister to do something. So there's with that background. We're from the government. We're here to help. What we really value is an industry-led, industry-led responses, industry-led contributions in ideas, so that we can be comfortable that when we go to ministers and say this is something you want to push, or this is something which we want to push, we've got to know we're pretty well right, because otherwise it's a risk for everyone. And so that's sort of a description of our day-to-day work and how we want to work with the people in the room here. What we've noticed with the problems in China is, firstly, we're not going to solve it easily, and we're not going to change much, and we need to think about what we want to change. There was someone used the expression, maybe it was meant about soft power, and that's the sort of thing which we would be looking at. Eugene talked about the APEC forum. There's also OECD forums, which are the sorts of places where we can go, but we have to be strategic about where we go. The other way of looking at that, though, is the peak bodies which we have in each country, on each various sector. They also have global peak bodies as well, and that's another grouping to bring in. So I think in summary, I've got two points to make. Is bringing all this together. What it seems to me, and Nick sort of said about some of the places I've played, is you need to have a strategy. You need to have a strategy which you're going to change, but you need to have a strategy to think about where we're going. And at this stage, the government can come there and discuss, but we can't set what the commercial objectives will be in 5 or 10 years time, and that's where we need to obviously all of us do our job and cooperate and collaborate. The other thing I must thank Meta for, as I said, in the industry department, it's our job to get in there to the details. And the presentation with the slides, it just made life so much easier. It will make so much life so much easier than it has been in the past. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Adrian. I'd also like to take the opportunity. We have someone also who's not up in the front of the room from the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade. It's quite an opportune time because we are in the midst, or the government's in the midst of negotiating the Australia-EU FTA. So I'd like to invite Callum Logan just to make a few comments about the status of those and in relation to the cosmetic sector.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you. I just want to briefly take this opportunity to mention the Australia-EU FTA. I'm sure many of you are probably aware negotiations were launched in June 2018. This is an excellent opportunity for Australia to secure market access to the EU and also to address a number of non-tariff barriers to trade. The EU, as you know, is an extremely large market. It's 500 million people, $22 trillion GDP. So this is a major opportunity for us. We'd like to hear from the industry about issues that are affecting your trade into the EU, as we are considering the addition of a cosmetics annex to the tariff barriers to trade chapter. So the best way for you to make a contribution is to go to the DFAT website and look at the EU FTA page, and you can make public comments there. We're very interested in industry submissions. Those will be ongoing throughout the negotiation process, and you're able to make a public submission or a confidential one if that's necessary. In terms of looking at the sort of examples that are relevant to the cosmetics annex, you may like to look as well at the TPP. That was a good example of a recently concluded comprehensive trade agreement, and that's the kind of a good indication of the benchmark we're trying to surpass in this FTA with the EU. So please, if you have interests that you'd like to see recognised in this agreement, take the time to look at that example, but please make the submission. We're very interested in getting a wide range of industry views that will try and inform the best outcome available for Australian industry.
Thank you very much. Thanks, Callum.
Nick. Thank you.
I'd like to ask Meta to come back up to the front and to make her way to the panel. And I'm going to. We've now got we've got some time, round about 40 minutes for questions. As I said, I've got at least 10, but this is an opportunity for you to ask questions of a fantastic panel. And we can go into as much detail as you have noticed. We can go into quite a bit of detail as Meta has done. We've got a number of experts here. It's a great opportunity for you in the room to ask the questions that you may have. But I will start off with a couple of questions initially, and that's first to Eugene in relation to your comments about the FTA discussions which may take place in the second half of this year in China, and if there were to be amendments made to chapter, just as a guideline for us in the room, what sort of time frame would we be looking at to have additional amendments added to the China-Australia Free Trade Agreement to include something like an agreement on animal testing?
So the chapter review discussions, of which there are a number of streams, are due to be held in Australia, not in China this year. And I don't think that anyone is going to be amending chapter in these discussions. They'll be reviewing the existing agreement. And within the terms of the existing agreement, then issues will be raised. And so there'll be scope once the meetings, the reviews are actually scheduled, to start to put onto the radar of Chinese officials where our concerns lie. And so it's an opportunity to put on, to get them to understand that this is, of increasing concern to us. I'm not aware, my colleagues might be able to correct me, but I'm not aware that anyone is going to be renegotiating chapter at this stage, if that's what you mean.
It was just a broad, question to you as to what the mechanism would be, but I think you've covered that very nicely. Thank you very much.
I will just add that the Chinese officials have made it clear to us that because of the importance of, and the uncertain nature of their discussions with the US, they don't have a lot of time to do all the things that would normally be scheduled in their year. So even though we hope to have chapter review discussions this year, we don't actually have a time scheduled for that yet. We're still trying to get that done. We expect that those discussions will commence this year, but there is uncertainty because of that situation. So that's a bit of a difficulty that we face.
Fantastic. And as a part of this industry engagement process, this is just a general question to all of you, Sophia, Eugene and Adrian. The businesses in the room, should they sort of be reaching out to you directly? Should they be reaching out to the DFAT office here in Melbourne? What's the best way for those that aren't already engaged in discussion or dialogue with you to reach out to you and to provide insights and some of the issues that the industry is facing?
Thanks, Nick. I might start with a response to that one. I guess one of the features of the new non-tariff barrier strategy is that we're working towards having a bit of a one-stop shop for businesses, so that you don't have to approach multiple departments and multiple people to get your message across. So I'd encourage you to go to tradebarriers.dfat.gov.au. I'll leave and send the address out, and you can just report any issues, whether that be with China, the EU, or anyone else, just one time, and we'll make sure that information is shared with all other relevant agencies. That said, if you have contacts, people in other areas, there's nothing to prevent you from approaching multiple areas, discussing it with multiple people, but we can guarantee that if you do report it to the new portal, that it will reach all areas that it needs to across government.
Thank you very much.
And I could just add one to that too. If you're going to China to, advance your business interests there, by all means consider calling on one of our embassies or our missions there. Austrade, DFAT and industry all have representatives in Beijing and other cities in China, and we do want to hear about what you're doing there, and if you give us a few weeks notice, we'll certainly meet you and spend some time with you, and if we can advise you, we'll certainly be happy to do that.
Thank you very much. Meta, during your in-depth overview this morning, there was some discussion about the responsible agent for registration. Now, this is a vexing issue because a number of businesses will have already gone down the path of application and will have made their distributor the responsible agent. Now, you mentioned there is no way to then, under the current regulations, to change that responsible agent back. But, there are going to be a lot of businesses that are already in the predicament where the responsible agent is their distributor. Now, are you sure there's no way to work around that? Are you sure there's no one we can talk to?
No. So, no, there's not. The thing here is, and I think you, as far as I understand, you have a forum where you also discuss cross-border e-commerce, you discuss the new e-commerce laws and so forth. So the responsible agent concept is something you have to get used to. It's not only for cosmetics, it's also for cross-border e-commerce. And we will see that repeated in a lot of other regulations for the future. So the whole change in the Chinese regulatory framework is that you have to have a legal entity in China. You have to have someone that they can actually find that are liable for the product safety, that are liable for fraud, and this kind of thing. So the whole framework is changing. And that concept of a responsible agent will become more and more prevalent, not only in cosmetics, but within all industries. And the problem with the cosmetic registration is that yes, you can no longer transfer them from one responsible agent to another. What you can do is you can annul them, but you have to start all over again. What I didn't say, and there was a lot of things I didn't mention, but obviously it takes, your registration only have a validity of 4 years. So you need to redo them anyway. And in this sense, some of our clients, they have decided they stay with a previous distributor as a responsible agent, and then all new product registrations are done in their own entity. They will be annulled anyway after 4 years, then they're no longer valid. So that's unfortunately the question. But if you want the risk scenario, then there's one risk that I would like to put on the table for all of you, and that is the power of attorney. So the power of attorney is a very important document for all of you. Whenever you appoint someone in China for some kind of either product registration or distribution of your product, you have these power of attorneys. We use them all the time for product registrations in China. These power of attorneys are extremely important documents. And unfortunately, once we work also very close with the government in Shanghai, they called over one day because an Australian company would like to have some advice. And this particular Australian company, they have provided their power of attorney to a Chinese partner years ago. They hardly recall what was in that power of attorney, but apparently in that power of attorney, they gave them all the rights, including to product registration. And that particular Australian government company was actually a cruelty-free company, and it had all their products tested on animals without their knowledge. And you can claim that's really stupidity and ignorance and so forth. There's many reasons. I also sign a lot of documents in bilingual where maybe not look into all the details. So the power of attorney is really a document you need to be very careful with. And there is a thing, and that is when you have tested on animals in China, it's in the system forever, and it's public available. So you can actually go online and see what products that has been tested on animals. So it's not like you can never go back and be a cruelty-free company again, because that's not how it works. But it's definitely in the record. So just so you know, power of attorney and responsible agent, that's where the red lights should kind of be blinking. And if you need any advice in that regards, we're happy to help you. And I also know the government in China is also well equipped to advise you on this one.
Thanks, Meta. You made the analogy right at the start of your presentation. I'm not going to repeat it, but to paraphrase, you can't. If you're going into the China market, you need to be committed, and you really can't do a China light. I guess the challenge, if you need to set up an entity to be your own responsible agent, it's not just a case of setting up a shell company like you can in Australia. There's actually a lot of complexity to getting an import-export license, operating and the regulatory elements of operating a WFOE is quite onerous. So this needs to be taken into consideration, I guess, as an overall strategy to medium to long-term growth within the China market, because this is not something you would want to engage in lightly.
Can I answer?
Yes.
What we see the trend in China, what is changing now is you have to, if you have ever engaged with the American market, you know that we always say the biggest danger is a lawsuit, right? You can get a lawsuit anytime you market a product because of the claims or because of ingredients or the content levels or something like that. It can even be that it's offensive of color or race or something like that, whatever. You have to start thinking that the Chinese market are getting there. You really are, you're risking not only something in regards to the government being fined or banned from the market, but you also have a huge risk from the consumers. We have the so-called professional shoppers in China now, and if you violate, let's say you make a wrong claim on your product, then what is happening is that the consumer go into the store and they actually buy tons of your products, like thousands of your products, and then they're actually entitled to get 10 times back as a reimbursement of their of your wrong claim of your product. So you have to get used to a market where you have to be safe, you have to play it safe, and the responsible agent is the one who will get the lawsuit and will be fined and will be even criminal charges at the moment is actually can happen. So what we have done, and that's just because we work quite a lot on trade barriers and how we can overcome them. We will during this year offer companies that we host your registrations in China as the responsible agent. We sign out the insurances for you in China, and we make a contractual work between us so that we own your product registrations on your behalf. And this is only for small companies, so it's not something we will offer for the big companies that has the ability to do this, but this is yet another way to try to overcome a trade barrier that prevents you from entering the market. It's done by, the legal work is done by King & Wood Medicines, they're part of our advisory board, so that we can overcome that barrier. You're not alone on this barrier. There's obviously also companies from a lot of other countries that has exactly the same barrier to market.
Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to see if there are any questions from you. If you'd like to put up your hand, and if you're selected, just to mention your name, your company, your question, and who that question is asked of. Yes.
Hi, I'm Mary from McPherson's. Just a question on that last comment, where your company is going to be the responsible agent.
Yeah.
But before you were mentioning that there's a requirement for being responsible for distribution. How does that work if your company's not a distribution company?
Yeah. It's a very, very relevant question because obviously most brands, they use maybe 10 different distributors. And our advice on the market size is always to use 10 different distributors, so at least 2 or 3, so you can benchmark who's doing a good job and who's not. So exclusive distribution in China is not something that we recommend. So it's a lot of paperwork. It's actually a lot of paperwork because every time you ship in a batch of products into China, you have to keep track on where they're distributed. And the authorities will actually require that you have a track record of all your products and where they're sold in China. And we just know from the smaller companies that that's not possible. So we will have to rely on the distributor information just as if you were the responsible agent in China. It's a lot of paperwork. So it's not going to be a service we can provide for free because it will require resources for us, administrative resources. It also requires a warehouse, and most importantly, it requires a quite hefty product insurance because we will be liable for your products in China.
I'm sorry, are you currently available for that service, or is it something that's being set up? Or,
It's actually King & Wood Medicines that helps us with that service at the moment, and we expect that we're able to provide it from this summer. It's something that we're drafting at the moment. I'm just completely scared of all these hefty insurance fees that we have been provided with because it's a very, very expensive solutions. But we believe that if we can provide it as a group, then we can also enable smaller companies to actually take part of this service. So yeah.
That's Northern Hemisphere style.
Yeah.
Very good.
Yeah. Sorry. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yes.
That's all right. I'm Faye from Lifespace Group, and I've got a question for Matt. Can I please ask, when you mentioned the cosmetic product regulation, it is applicable to cross-border e-commerce in China, or cross-border e-commerce got their own regulation of cosmetic products, or if it is different, would you see there is a kind of a merge at the end of the day, so the cross-border e-commerce will be part of the China regulation of cosmetic products? Thank you.
Good question. Good question. Actually, we work a lot with live space and we love them, so I just want to add that. Cross-border e-commerce, the good thing is cross-border e-commerce, as you know, by the end of this year, after years of tension in the industry, especially within infant formula, it was announced that for the future you can freely trade cross-border e-commerce into China without compliance with the Chinese regulations. So it was celebrated, obviously, especially I would say supplement companies from Australia were super happy because there was some nervousness about this. There's completely different regulations for cross-border e-commerce and then when you're selling in China. For supplements company, it was a good news. We don't see the same kind of celebration for cosmetic. And the reason is that the cosmetic industry, the global cosmetic industry, they just know that you have to be on the market. You can go down here just on the street and find daigou shops where you have lots of supplements and infant formula products, but very, very few skincare and cosmetic products. And there's a reason for that, because as I said in the beginning of the presentation, you need to be there. So it's not that relevant for the market. That kind of trade liberalization as we have seen for cross-border e-commerce, I hope that we will see the same trend going on, but I think we need to keep in mind that in China we have a market where the protection of the consumer rights is getting more and more on top of the agenda, and that means that the companies that are selling and are active in China will face more and more requirements in regards to compliance for claims on their marketing, on their advertising, on the campaigns they're running in the supermarkets and so forth. We do quite a lot of work. We have 5 people full-time working just on this daily work for the companies that are working in China to screen all their material. Because if you make a wrong claim on the Chinese market, it can be fined with quite hefty fees. But what most companies are worried about is to be banned in China. I think the biggest Australian brands active in China, they have actually been fined already. And they have not been fined because they on purpose violated the laws, but they were fined because they didn't know better. They made claims or they used pictures that they didn't know was not allowed in China. So a lot of our ongoing daily work is actually advice on compliance for companies that are active. I think we will see cross-border e-commerce in China. It's a huge growth driver. We will not see a change in that, and I hope we will keep it as it is now. For apart from cosmetic industry, for most of our companies, cross-border e-commerce is an excellent test of the first. It's kind of a market test to know more about China. And in that sense, we were actually celebrating when that happened, because we know that 100% of our clients, they had tested the Chinese market first by cross-border e-commerce before they enter. So in that sense, it's an excellent channel to the market. Just with that little, I would say, but for cosmetics, it doesn't really work because we don't see winners on the Chinese market through cross-border e-commerce. We see information, we see brand awareness increases, but we don't really see revenues by cross-border e-commerce. When they enter into the market, they start earning money. So it's different from Swiss and Blackmores, A2, Bellamy's, and whoever we see that have both channels open. We don't see that for cosmetics.
Right, thank you, Bei, for your question. Do we have any other questions from the room?
Yes, that's one.
Oh, sorry.
That's okay. Hi, Catherine. I obviously do some consulting for some other brands, and I've got Aroma Baby, and I write for a few trade magazines in the industry. That's not on. And I just a comment. Lovely to see you in Melbourne too, Meta.
Thank you.
Just a comment on registration. So we entered China 12 years ago, but even when you successfully register, often brand owners don't realise that if you change one little thing on your label, that will affect the registration. So I'm just pointing that out when I think of it. But my question is, you mentioned in Cosmetic Valley, if a brand was to manufacture there, that the manufacturer needs to be noted. So is that on the label or the packaging, or Does that need to be on the
Yeah.
brand's packaging?
Yes.
Okay.
So I'm so sorry about this. Actually, I wanted to bring a sample of L'Oreal's because on all, so the big cosmetic groups, as we saw, the top 12 brands in China, American brands, French brands, and so forth, they're already producing. All of them are producing in China, and in the Function district, our partner, I think it's. Yeah.
Maybe we get you to take the mics.
Okay, sorry. So, the big brands are already producing there. I think it's not only for the Chinese market, but we see, for example, all the color cosmetic, Yves Saint Laurent, Dior, and so forth, are produced there already. And they write their manufacturing name. And often, for example, Cosmax is a good example. Cosmax is one of the biggest OEM producers in the world, and they have their biggest production globally is based in the Function district, and they literally manufactured by Cosmax. But so our recommendation is for some of the biggest brands that are now entering into the Leaping Bunny pilot is to set up their own little filling. I mean, you don't need much to do the filling and packaging of your products, and then you can write made by Body Shop China, made by CoverGirl China, wherever it is, and that's the only text that you actually mandatory must be on your packaging material. Apart from that, you're free to come forward with whatever claims you may have in that regard. But I would say for packaging claims, as you know, we like to take a very detailed view on your packaging material to avoid that you make any mistakes, because it's really often an area where a little small claim that you don't even think about can make a difference between approval and non-approval, and it's getting more and more strict in that regards, especially in regards to product claims.
Thanks for your question, Catherine. Thank you. Yes.
Hi, Matt. This is David from eCommerce. Question regarding the registration. You mentioned about the cosmetics, but you didn't mention specific on the baby skincare. So for that registration, does it require a longer lead time or more specific requirement, or is it the same?
For baby?
Baby skincare.
That's a very good question. The Chinese laws for baby products is in my view, I think actually it's exactly the same as for any other products, and it's a little bit surprising because they have done quite a lot for infant formula and therefore for baby products. But we actually haven't seen any specific regulations for baby products, but I want to check that. I want to be absolutely sure that I answer you correctly. But so far, I don't think we have any specific regulations for baby product registration. That would be a surprise to me. There may be some regulations in regards to the claims for infants and babies, because that's regulated quite fiercely, what you can claim outside of your products, and especially because there's been a lot of scandals in regards to products that have specific baby infant claims on them. But whether that impacts your registration, good question. I would have to check that. I wouldn't know. But it's a very relevant question because for two reasons. First of all, it's heavily regulated, that's number one. And number two is that baby products, so baby and children's skincare products, really, really good area. And I would say sunscreen products for babies and for toddlers, amazing area. Because we lack these products, and Australia has a brand of having very safe and healthy products. So the mothers would not hesitate to use an Australian produced sunscreen product. So that's a really good one. And another thing I just want to mention, this is my own personal one. So I was in Thailand this summer with my boys, and one of the consumer observation that you look when you see Chinese moms applying skincare, they actually do it right, or sunscreen. they use almost half a bottle of sunscreen products. So there's not one place that are not sunscreen on it, and on top of that, they get clothes on, right? So it's the sound way of using, the right way to use sunscreen products actually. But it's a little bit different from us from Scandinavia, who mostly use coconut oil to get even more. But it's an amazing area for babies and toddlers. In general, it's not only for cosmetics, obviously, it's for supplements and a lot of other areas. Yeah, thank you.
Thanks, David. And perhaps if you did have a specific product question, you can follow up with Meta afterwards. Thank you. Any further questions? Yes.
It's for Meta. I'm Stephen Henderson from Total Beauty Network. With regards to the Leaping Bunny project, so do you, and then you've been mentioned about setting up your own filling.
Yeah.
Sorry, then setting up your own filling facility. So is Leaping Bunny at the moment during the pilot, are they actually certifying the filling facilities within China, within that region?
Yeah.
And would they anticipate being outside that region if it was somewhere else within China? Are they open to doing that, or is it just specifically in that province?
A very good question. Cruelty-free Cruelty-free in UK decided that in order to proceed with that project, to overcome that trade barrier, there was two requirements. First of all, they wanted to make absolutely sure that the government that they promised in that area in regards to the post-market test, that was one requirement. So we're restricted at the moment in the Leaping Bunny pilot program to only sell in districts where we have gotten a verbal confirmation that no post-market test or animal test as part of the post-market test takes place. This is number one. Number two is we restricted in the district, in the Fuxing district, but that's mainly because of us. Because our work is to do the auditing and the managing of all your fillers. So we physically go out there and inspect the facilities with our team. And we are also there during the filling and the packaging to make sure that nothing goes out of the wrong door. It's not that we don't trust them. I mean, they are on a level that is much higher than we see in Europe. But it's part of the commitment to the program that we actually audit everything in detail. So we are there from the very beginning to the end. And that's only possible right now in the Fuxing district. Our hope is that within 2019 that we're actually able to expand the program to the rest of China. And that's one of the reasons why when Nick said, why don't you come? I said, I'll come immediately because to be very honest with you, you think that this seminar today is for you, but it's not. It's actually for the government because we need their support. And we need their support in order to advance with this program. And it's a unique opportunity right now. So I hope that within 2019 that we're able to expand the program. Eventually, the end goal is, of course, that the Chinese government will change the regulation so that mandatory animal test is abolished. That's the end goal. Right?
Sorry.
Can I ask a second question?
Yeah.
Thank you. And when you said with regards to claims, so we do a lot of organic, certified organic products.
Yeah.
But also with regards to natural, so in China with regards to claims, what's the sort of the definition or regulation around using the word natural or saying that a product's natural with regards to cosmetics?
Yeah, the good thing is you can actually claim natural. There are certain requirements that you need to adhere to in order to claim natural, so this is number one. For organic, the paradox part at the moment, we can actually put an organic claim on a product. So you can write organic on your product in English, but you cannot do it in Chinese. And you just have to consider the fact that it's maybe only 10% who will read it in English and understand what you're saying, right? They will look after the organic claim in Chinese. So I've been obviously in China for many years. When I came to China, there was no organic aisles. There was no organic shelves in the vegetable department, in the grocery stores and so forth. Now, and I have a picture that I should have included it today.
now we see at the end of the day that the aisles in the vegetable section, like the fresh produce section, they are ripped off. All the organic product, they're taken off the shelf at the end of the day. They're simply not enough in our local supermarket. And we are downtown Shanghai in an area that is mostly populated by Chinese. So it's a Chinese demand now. I also know that a lot of consumers are buying. There's a route from Melbourne to Shanghai every day where they import fresh organic milk, dairy products, and it's a best-selling product. I have to say it costs 40 RMB per liter, but if you're a mom with the children, you buy that because you're sure that it's good quality. So there's no doubt that whenever we are done with that barrier to market that is a mandatory animal test, the next one is to make sure that we get organic cosmetics approved as well. That's definitely something that, and also something we would love to work within. Now we just need to get over this barrier, but it's definitely something that is very relevant to work on. Yeah.
Thanks, Stephen. Do we have any other questions? Yes.
It's Mary again. Question for Sophia. With regard to the non-tariff barrier programs you're working on, you said that there's already maybe 100 barriers that have been identified and maybe even more. How is the government going to prioritise which ones are going to get attention in what order?
Sure. Thanks, Mary. That's a good question and something that we're working on at the moment. I guess there's a range of different factors that the government considers when it actions NTBs. I mean, it really depends on what the NTB is. Some might just be a request for information, can be resolved quite quickly through informal channels. Others are much bigger. So at the moment, we're looking to develop a triage system and including some different criteria and methods, but we're still in the process of working through that. Some of the main factors that do come up regularly, and this hasn't been a formally agreed position yet, are of course, the size of the market, how big is this export market, the impact of the NTB, and that's going to include a range of different factors. Is it a blanket ban, this issue or something that fully prevents Australian access? Is it just more of a procedural delay? Is it something that adds cost? How much? So an assessment of what's the scale of the issue for the industry, as well as the trade exposure. If a particular sector might have very high exposure to one particular market, and then the regulation is changed, it's going to have a much bigger impact. As well as, of course, the level of interest from industry. So the number of companies that approach us and scope of companies does have an impact. So again, encourage you to really report all the issues, whether that be big or small, can help us to really just build that picture, and you might not know whether it's actually quite a systemic issue. And also we'll also look to our posts and ask them for an assessment of Australian government's ability to really influence an outcome. Some issues are going to be easier than others for Australia to have an influence over, and that, again, it's more of a qualitative assessment about how likely it is an investment of resources going to be able to solve the problem. So that's just a few of the different issues that we'd consider.
I think I might ask a question. Meta, you mentioned after the technical review that up to 50% of the applications are rejected.
Yeah.
Why is that?
Yeah.
And that seems like a remarkably high percentage.
Yeah, it is. And it's a nightmare. This is it's actually it's a problem that we work with not only within cosmetic but within many industries. And I think if it was a food seminar, we would definitely talk about this a lot. That there is what we call a personal evaluation in China, and we all know that we have an officer that are in charge for NMPA, and we get something approved, and then a couple of months later we receive the notification that because of this and that is actually not approved after all. There's nothing unique about this. This is a reality in China, and we try to take it with a big smile. So we try to say, wow, you got your approval number today and celebrate, but only celebrate 50%, because we still have 50% chance that we will actually get rejected. Knock on wood. So far, none of our applications has been rejected, but we also have a very detailed team working on this. But you should definitely expect that your product approval can be rejected. And the only advice to you is, one, don't celebrate when you get your approval number, because the likelihood that it will be rejected afterwards is pretty high. That's number one. Number two is that make sure that the agent that you work with is actually doing this as part of their service, i.e. change whatever is supposed to be changed in order to be approved, and it's part of the package. So that's it's reality to working time. That's how it is.
Thank you very much. That concludes and wraps up this morning's session. I just first of all like to thank Meta, to thank Sophia, Vincent, Eugenia Lin and Adrian White for their comments. And I think a round of applause is before Meta gives out her gifts, I just thought I'd make a little bit of a recap because look, it's been fantastic to have such expertise in the room and to cover a topic which Meta said is a little bit boring. I think it's fascinating, but that may just talk to me being a bit of a geek. But so if I can recap a few things that were said during this morning. So no China light. So remember that analogy of Meta's when she started off. I like the comment about A-beauty, which is in reference to K-pop and J-pop. It's now called A-beauty. So Australian beauty is the next big thing in China. And obviously it's important that there is a strong differentiation, and Australian brands naturally have that, which is fantastic. There is the growing awareness of ethical beauty amongst the Chinese consumer, and there is an emergence of Chinese brands, and also Chinese brands claiming to be ethical beauty and cruelty-free. We have testing labs that are going through testing slightly quicker than before, which is good news, but the overall process is a long way. Obviously, Meta made a comment in relation to the responsible agent, and I think that's something that businesses obviously need to be aware of, and how best to handle that. That's going to be relevant for your businesses. And one of the things that faces every business engaging with China, obviously, is the first to file trademark issue and how to deal with squatters. It's an ongoing challenge for all of us. And then finally, the introduction to the Leaping Bunny project and the pilot project, because as Meta has said, and certainly many conversations I've had with Meta, is that this is only but the start of a process. And the end game is to have fully Australian produced products to be able to be sold in China without animal testing. No need for filling in China, 100% export. That's the end game. It's a process. And I think from what we've talked about today, it's a process in which government, industry need to work together to work towards. And that is where our federal government experts come into the fray with a whole of government approach, which I think is a really encouraging approach. And Sophia mentioning that a good way to interact with the federal government on these issues is via the trade barriers portal on the DFAT website. So encourage everybody to engage with DFAT, to engage with George and colleagues at Global Victoria. I would like to again thank our panellists. I'd really like to give a very big thanks to George Descala and the Global Victoria team for working with us on this, but having the vision of trying to bring so many people together to have a great conversation, to start this dialogue, which is a very strategically important one for Victoria and for the cosmetics industry. So thank you very much. And thank you all for coming on a Monday morning and being really attentive and engaged in some pretty deep and technical content, but content of which I'm sure you'll agree is of real relevance and importance to all of us. So thank you all very, very much. And we have outside lunch. There's an opportunity for you to meet and discuss anything with Meta, with Sophia, with Eugene, with Adrian, and with your fellow cosmetic industry colleagues. And thank you all very much.